Hey there YouTube, I'm Ikitsu, this is the Ikitsu Times. Welcome to my channel. Welcome to a little bit of Age of Wonders Planetfall. So today we're going to be looking at the Vanguard Psynumbra. And this is not a faction combination that I think works super well, and I also don't think that the synergy necessarily really fits super well, but there are ways that you can take advantage of the combination here. So let's start by diving a little bit into the tech tree. First of all, we've got access to a couple of your Synumbra abilities here. So Shadow's Manifest here, Initiation Rites. This can be useful circumstantially, but I think it's more important for other factions. Currently, the way the game works, you're capable of getting 3 ranks using a Tier 5 Research Military Innovation Center. So as you can see here, plus 3 ranks, plus 30% to military research for having this at level 5. So if you've got access to this, you can get just shy of cap level. The prime rank for units is by far the most important rank for a unit though, so being just short of that is not necessarily all that super. If we take a look here at a standard trooper here, prime rank for him costs us 40 experience points, so that's a quite steep investment in a unit to get it up to 40 experience points to begin with. You have to kill a lot of units, have to have them engaged in a lot of battles to get them up to level 40. If we take a look at a higher tier unit here, this is a Vanguard Assault Bike. This requires 60 to get up to prime rank. If we look at something like the Walker, it requires 80. Something like the tank here, I believe it's also 80. And then we've also got things like the Vanguard Initiate, which is 60, and the Mediocre, which is 80. We've also even got the carriers here, which require a massive 120. This means that certain units you're unlikely to ever see the prime rank for. For most factions using the Synumbra, you can use that technology to easily get your initiates up to prime rank there. Same with the Mediocre, same with the Harbinger of whatever. So those units, you can definitely get that last prime rank, which gives you plus 6 health in this particular case, prime rank range, and plus 5% to accuracy. And generally speaking, every single unit is going to get some hit point bonus, usually depending on the tier that they're at, a bonus to accuracy, as well as a special ability that makes them a little bit more unique. It's the fact that you're able to get all 3 of those bonuses, as well as the fact that the prime rank unique bonus is usually incredibly impactful to the way that unit functions, that makes this such a really desirable thing there. But in the particular case of the Vanguard, you don't need that tech to get there. So the only reason that you're going to want to use, let's go back here, Initiation Rites is for the secondary effects, or if you're not quite at tier 5 for your research hub for your units there, that also gives you a pretty good reason to use that. So your units also spawn an Echo of Despair upon death. Now, this can be used for some interesting rush strategies, but this really doesn't have anything to do with Vanguard. Basically, what you can do is you can take a whole bunch of Whisperers of Discord, which can be produced for fairly inexpensive. They're only 60 energy, and they don't require your production slots. This means that you can summon a whole bunch of these fairly quickly. Since they count as a Psynumber unit, when they're killed, they turn into that other type of unit there, so long as you've got access to the Initiation Rites. And the thing about the Echo of Despair is that it's substantially more powerful than the Whisper of Despair. It's quite a decent unit in a lot of respects there, especially against melee opponents. Personally, I think that you would only use this for a cheesy rush strat of some sort, potentially, using scouts or something in some sort of weird way. Personally, I don't play that way, so it's not really that important for me, so I wouldn't personally use that combination. The next one is Sadistic Indoctrination. There's some combinations that can make this proc consistently, in which case you're dealing a good 25% extra damage. The thing is, there are certain unit types that are immune to the morale effects there, and even if you do some of the things to make the enemy morale really low, sometimes they'll resist the effects there and you won't get the effect at all. Sometimes you're going to try and hit them with that, and they're going to end up having such high morale as their normal value that you're going to reduce it to somewhere where you're still not proccing sadism. So it's actually quite difficult to get Sadistic Indoctrination to really work to your best benefit there. What the first one that's really good here is Vital Manipulation. +1 resistance to all damage is incredibly powerful, and +20% psionic damage with psionic attacks is pretty good. It's not great, it's not terrible, but you're able to use that as a way to sort of multiply the effects of your forces there. And lastly, you've got Sinister Chance. This means that anyone that's in your domains suffers -400 morale and -2 to their status effect resistance, which again, this can be powerful as a defensive measure if people are attacking you. I do think that this one's a little bit situational. Like, I tend not to want to be on the back foot and to use things that allow me to attack the enemy more effectively. So all of the things in Psynumbra, as far as those doctrines go, is designed around the idea that you're going to use your abilities to make your more limited troops more efficient. This sort of means that when you're combining it with things that are innate to Vanguard, the Frontier Policies ones in particular, Colony Militia, that means you're going to be able to churn out a decent number of units through Colony Militia and then multiply their effectiveness through things like Initiation Rites or more particularly Torture Regiments. Specifically, Torture Regiments, I think, is the one that works well with Vanguard, but there could be other situations where you might want to use the other ones there. I think that for this combination, you're mostly going to be relying on the stronger economic bonuses that Vanguard's capable of providing you, such as the Hearts and Minds Doctrine, as well as potentially something like, where the hell even is it? Well, I guess you could use something like Planetary Conquest, but I don't think that really counts. There should be one that gives you... Actually, that might still be... Yeah, it's also Hearts and Minds. So basically just Hearts and Minds, as well as the Frontier Survival. So those sort of abilities just really work well no matter what situation you're in, allowing you to get more units, more food, more production, just all sorts of good stuff really quickly there. I think that that's sort of one of the bigger advantages of Vanguard, is that they've got relatively decent policies that they can enact that make it so that they're capable of sort of producing solid cities no matter where they are. In terms of the military stuff here, you're going to be looking at your basic troop first of all. The basic troop does not synergize super well with the abilities that are granted to you by the Synumbra, unfortunately. The only thing that really works well with them is Consuming Gaze here. This is a thing that gives your units a pretty decent repeatable heal, as well as the ability to apply Broken Mind, which also gives you the ability to provide a or a 100% chance to hit attack there without having to require all of your movement. So a unit that's been getting staggered to hell there can use Consuming Gaze still to get some of those hit points back that they probably lost while they're getting pummeled by whatever. The fact that it's also repeatable, the fact that you can use it once every 2 turns, or 3 turns rather, means that this is a pretty powerful way to keep your units in the battles if you really need to. If you think that you can survive or get away with it, being able to use Consuming Gaze and then run the units away until they can get it back can be an effective way to keep your Vanguard soldiers in the fight there. There are some other techs out there that sort of work with this. Things like the Pain Mirror work okay, but it's a little bit too expensive for your basic trooper there. I don't think that any of the abilities work super well with engineers, unlike with other factions there. So I don't think that this is going to be a situation where you're going for strong engineer combinations, and that's not really how I went with things. Same with the Air Corps. I don't think that they synergize super well with these abilities. I don't think that they're the right kind of unit for that, but you might find yourself in situations where you have to go air. In that particular case, you can combine your air units with a couple of these Whispers of Discord to make stacks that are capable of not flight but hovering. Makes for very sort of inexpensive air stacks that can be sort of augmented with a couple of units with gunships there. Next up, you got things like the tanks there, and there are ways that I think that tanks can in particular be built. Walkers can also be used instead, but I think the tank is a slightly better choice. And unlike with other faction combinations, I think this is one of the very few combinations that I could find where the carrier becomes quite powerful there. As you'll notice, I have not bothered getting the Herald of Oblivion, but if you're going to be building this guy, just be warned, this thing has a ridiculous price tag. It is a very powerful unit there. It does have the ability to continually heal itself. If you've got a couple of these guys, they're going to be able to sort of tear through enemies no problem whatsoever. They've got the ability to also use this Abyssal Reverberation, capable of getting your unit across very large distances, teleporting to the middle of the enemy, and then dealing a ton of damage to sort of everybody around you. You've also got a pretty powerful psionic buff there, as well as a powerful psionic debuff. Panic is quite good, and Filled with Despair on a success is extremely good at sort of nerfing a bunch of enemy units down to oblivion if they sort of bunched up there. This thing also does innately have kinetic, biochemical, arc, and psionic resistance. Some of the other resistances are from something else there, and it's also immune to stagger, so it's a very, very powerful unit there. I do, however, think that it's not necessarily worth the cost. Like, the amount of Cosmite that we're spending on this guy, we could be buying several fully upgraded lighter units that are capable of tearing this thing apart pretty effectively. Down one from that, we're looking at the Melictors. The Melictors actually are pretty interesting. The Soul Seeker ability is a low damage repeating attack there that's capable of outputting an okay amount because of the fact that it's psionic and deals damage that ignores armor. This means that as you get later and later into the game and as more armor starts being piled up on top of units, the Soul Seeker ability becomes more and more valuable, but also this thing chains to other enemies, meaning that you've got a fairly decent attack that's capable of hitting multiple enemy units, which is always a good thing if you're capable of doing it. One of the problems with it is it doesn't have very high damage, though, for what you're getting, for what you're paying for here. And also the broken mind chance that it applies from this is really, really low. If this had a higher, like if this had a strength 8 chance to apply broken mind, this would be an amazing ability. The reality is I usually see this getting resisted over and over and over again. Their abilities Cage of Suffering and Lure of the Dark I don't particularly think are fantastic, but they're kind of okay. There's certain situations where you're going to find a unit that you just need to get rid of that you wouldn't be able to kill with a regular attack routine that you can get rid of using Lure of the Dark or Cage of Suffering. Just get them out of the fight, and you'll have a fairly high percent chance of dealing with some of those units there. Typically, these are not high tier units that are capable of resisting these sort of things, but at the same time, it's usually going to be okay to get rid of an enemy low tier unit out of a fight just really, really quickly there. I do think that other units that exist that cost 20 Cosmite, though, can probably just focus down and kill an enemy unit much, much more easily than these guys can. Because of that, I have difficulty really thinking that they're great, but there are certain things that they work okay at. Lastly, you've got the Initiate. The Initiate is actually one of the most changed units for Synumbra. I think that is actually the most changed unit for Synumbra in the current patch here. Their Soul Spear became a shotgun type weapon, reducing its range and changing it to single action and dramatically increasing the damage it deals. This means that you can use these guys to sort of get around the enemy flanks, deal a single large scale hit there, and hope that that does a ton of damage. And this has actually got some good synergy with Vanguard. So let's take a look at sort of how I mod these units here. So this is what I've gotten for my Trooper, and the only reason I've given these guys Pain Mirror is because I've got tons of Cosmite right now. I'm getting plus 53 a turn. Consuming Gaze, this is a great way to keep these guys in the fight there a little bit longer, and Nanite Injectors. I can actually heal these guys 35 points in a single turn and increase our resistances by an extra point there. In addition to the fact that we've already got a whole bunch of resistances, and the fact that we've got Pain Mirror means that these guys become incredibly tough to deal with. We're not really modifying our Vanguard assault bikes there or our gunships, and in this particular case, not the Walker. If I was going to modify the Walker, it's a little bit worse in every way in this particular instance compared to the tank, because it's just not as durable of a unit there. And I think that that's sort of what you really are looking for in this particular case here. Now we take a look at the tank here. This thing I think is quite strong for what we're doing here. We've got access to the reactive armor plating and the Pain Mirror. So combining these together gives this guy a lot of hit points, armor, and shields, as well as a pretty okay attack even though I haven't upgraded its weapon systems. What this thing can do is it can rumble straight into the enemy lines there and just sort of be ridiculously hard to kill, and the fact that you're dealing a bunch of damage to it through the reactive armor plating as well as the Pain Mirror sometimes means that units that are trying to hit this thing are taking more damage from it by attacking it than they're dealing to the tank. Which is absolutely ridiculous if you're able to pull that off there. It also gives you a small chance of giving a broken mind to the enemy units, which I think is actually quite strong. There's also a couple interesting options with the way that I play this that are going to make the tanks capable of healing quite effectively. In any event, though, we've also got a version with the flash module here, plus 12 strength chance to cause blind, means that your enemies can't focus fire as efficiently. The reason is that you blind a couple of the enemy units as your tanks are pushing forward, which means that only, like, say 3 of their units can hit, which means they can't focus fire one of your tanks down by having all 6 of their units charge down one single tank. So I think that that helps quite a bit there. The other option is to go with the Plasma Disintegrator. It has a very, very small chance of instantly killing a unit, but it does also have the chance to shred armor. And the reason that this is effective in combination is that late game you're going to see a lot more heavily armored units, just because they're going to have the production facilities that provide that extra armor. If we take a look at this guy here, he's got 8 armor, which means he's reducing the attacks from his own weapons by 10. Like, you'd be taking 7 damage per shot from these laser cannons here if it wasn't for the fact that this is armor shred. So assuming that this tank did not have armor shred and was shooting at a tank similar to this here, you'd be dealing 7 damage per hit multiplied by 3. That would be 21 damage. So it would take 4 of these tanks, it would take 5 of these tanks firing and getting all hits to take out one of itself, and this is why the blinding module is actually pretty effective there. Now, this combination does make these tanks incredibly hard to kill, which is the most important part of it, but also in the process of having to try and kill them, you take a bunch of damage. You deal yourself a huge amount of damage over time, which is why I think this is really quite a strong sort of combination there. It does cost an absolutely ridiculous amount of Cosmite, however, so that's the biggest downside to these. Next up, we've got the craziest thing I've got going here. It's the drone carrier. It's the same sort of thing. Now, the nice thing about drone carriers is that their drones adopt reactive armor and pain mirror. So I can dish out a attack drone here. It starts off with full attack action, so it can move into the enemy, it can fire at them, and it has a small chance of instantly killing a tier 1 unit. Usually it's only like 7% to 20%, that sort of range there. But the fact that that percent chance of wiping out a tier 1 or tier 2 unit at all exists, the fact that they're able to sort of fire out so many shots over the course of a fight means that that's really dangerous. And it's also quite capable of doing a lot of damage there. The fact that they've got then reactive armor plating and reactive or pain mirror means that those drones are capable of dishing out extra damage to enemy units that are trying to deal damage to them. So you either have to ignore the drones and let them potentially automatically disintegrate your units as you push forward to try and attack the drone carrier, which is itself extremely durable, which is also capable of using its laser cannon, which could also instantly destroy you. But you're also getting hit by the drones behind as you do that, whereas if you try to swat down all the drones, because of the buff to the drone carrier in the recent patch there, it's capable of outputting more and more drones that all have those sort of ability to cause you to chip yourself down. It's basically the ability to throw out like a fist and say, stop hitting yourself, because that's what its drones cause the enemy to do. It's really, really powerful. And when they finally manage to get some damage down on the drone carrier, you can just launch a repair drone behind yourself and then have it repair the drone carrier. It's ridiculous. You could also have these guys flying around and repairing your tanks in addition to that. So, and again, if they want to focus down the drone carrier's repair drone, they have to sort of take a bunch of damage for attacking the drone as well. So it's kind of obnoxious in that sort of sense there. It's very, very expensive. It's a big investment, especially in terms like your Cosmite. 109 Cosmite produces one of these. But it is worth it to have one or two of these in an army there, just so you can sort of have an option to siege down an enemy in a really sort of obtuse kind of way there. Next up, we have the Initiates. This is how I like them in the sort of mid to early game there. This is not too hard to get access to. You've got the jetpack, consuming gaze, and the nanite injectors. And this gives them quite a decent amount of defensive ability in early game. The nanite injectors help keep them alive really efficiently, as well as the ability to then consume and gaze if they still need some more hit points there. They're able to get their flanks really easily thanks to the jetpacks, and that makes them all quite decent. The one that I got later, though, replaces the nanite injectors with the sequential kill system. Again, all of their abilities only take one action point, so the sequential kill system lets them fling out extra attacks pretty quickly afterwards. Malictors have got innate durability to them, that's pretty high. In addition to that, they're also capable of dealing okay amounts of damage without too much mods, but more importantly, you're using these guys ultimately for their abilities when you're using them. As a result, you don't necessarily need to focus on giving them high power offense mods, but I do like giving them the consuming gaze so that they can sustain themselves, heal up a little bit, and use the jetpacks. The reason that the jetpack is important on the Malictors is because Cage of Suffering and Lure of the Dark are full actions with only full range, with 5 range. This means there's going to be lots of times where you're not in range to pull either of those off there, and that means that if you want to use either of those abilities, it's really much more easy to use the jetpack to fly your way in there and then use those abilities once you've sort of done that, because the jetpack itself is a free action to use. It also gives them a way to sort of get out of a bad situation there, because they're not necessarily the sort of unit that I think is super mobile. They're not really immobile either, though, so there is that, I guess. But I think that this is a unit that really does benefit from that extra little bit of mobility. They're also one of the few units with this type kind of like stat line that is, in fact, an infantry unit that can wear the jetpack. I think it's a lot less important on them than it is on the initiates. It really is just because their abilities are range 5 instead of range 7, or even range 9 if you want to go crazy with it. Taking a look at the other stuff here, important things to note: you could get a whole bunch of Whispers of Discord. Pretty powerful if you sort of focus on that there. Visions of Darkness I don't think is super good there. It does synergize quite well if you want to use that negative morale for, I can't remember, sadism, to get that extra damage from sadism. But I think you're more realistically going to be focusing on things like the security drones. I like getting rid of spies and stuff like that. I don't particularly find the psionic abilities doctrines to be super effective there, but you can definitely use them if you really want to. It's just that you're generally speaking going to get more mileage out of the Vanguard ones. In terms of these other things down here, the ability to just drop down a damage spike for fairly cheap here, this is pretty okay. It's a good amount of damage. It doesn't require you to do anything too special there. The fact that it's got massive impact does let you sort of screw with snipers and stuff like that really effectively. A Cursed Gift here, I don't really find this to be super useful. It can be used in certain situations kind of okay, but the big thing about this one is, again, it's relatively inexpensive. I don't think that this works super well in my combination just because my units are not melee. I think if you're against melee or you're using melee, that's when this becomes much more powerful. But since I don't use melee commanders, that's really less of a thing there. Next up, you got access to Gift of Oblivion. This can be useful, but I find it to be too expensive, and it's not necessarily super useful. Basically, the ability to heal your own units already exists a lot in this sort of composition thanks to Consuming Gaze. I think that that's more reliable and more common for me than to use this sort of operation here. And then we look down over here, we've got the symbol, the Aria of Emptiness here. This one's been useful a couple of times. The ability to render enemies catatonic can really mess with an enemy composition there, and forces them to sort of run around in circles without acting properly. Even if this fails, the ability to engage Broken Mind across the enemy battlefield really does help with your follow-up for sort of mopping up whatever's left there. Lastly, you've got the ability to get the Sacrifice of the Abyss to get the Herald of Oblivion. This is what you would use either just cheap spam units near you for, where you could get a much more powerful unit, but realistically, I think the best way to get this is to mind control an enemy unit and then use Sacrifice to the Abyss, which kills the unit and prevents them from killing your Malactor. Because normally if you mind control someone, you're up close, so they can just focus fire down your Malactor. It dies, they gain control of their unit back. So this is a great way to sort of finish off that unit so your Malactor doesn't become a high priority target. But even here, what I think actually is the best techs for deployments there is Rapid Maneuverability and Sentry Technology. Rapid Maneuverability gives you access to deploy Valkyrie, and this lets you drop down a unit behind the enemy lines, have it swing at someone once, and open up an attack for your initiate, because you've now got the ability to fire a flank. Because the Valkyrie drops down, attacks someone in the back, that person has to turn around. Depending on what type of unit it is, certain types of units will not turn around for anything. But for many units that you're going to use this with, you get them to turn around, and then you can fire them at them in the back with the initiate. And this is a really good combination, I think, that this faction's quite good at doing. You can also do it with the heavy launcher turret. You drop it down behind the enemy, it hits a couple of them, they turn around, and then you can get flanking shots on them with the initiate, which is it's kind of how these guys have to do things to get damage. The fact that these guys are considered flankers means that these guys really are kind of behind on damage unless they're able to get that sort of flanking hit in against the enemy there. It's sort of the equivalent of getting up to about a 21-ish damage attack there base, which is kind of where you need to be to make it so that your attack is equivalent to just a basic soldiers there, assuming that, for example, your standard trooper had to go through a little bit of armor. Your standard Vanguard trooper here has got the assault rifle with 9x3, that's 27 damage. If you assume that he has to get through 2 points of armor or something like that, then you're suddenly looking at them being equal. There's a lot of situations where even when you're flanking, though, that the trooper is just dealing a little bit more damage. And again, you could also be flanking with your trooper. They don't get the bonus, but they can still deal extra damage doing it that way. So anyway, let's take a look at how some of my armies formed up here, and I wanted to also show off all this stuff here. So I have technically already beaten this campaign. I rolled it back to this turn so I could show you something kind of important here, but this army here, pretty lousy stack here. We've got some unupgraded troopers and some bikes. These are not really that important. They're just sort of filler that I produced in the early game and had kicking around for a while. However, we have got an initiate and a mediocre. More importantly, we've got this drone carrier and some random stuff that we picked up along the way. And then over here we've got the drone carrier and 3 laser tanks. One of these guys is not fully upgraded, so we don't even have fully upgraded laser tanks. Then we've also got an initiate that is, again, not cap level, but it is still the really expensive design there. These 3 stacks here wipe out all of these enemies. And not just by a little bit, they're actually capable of doing that by a pretty easy margin, just because of how ridiculously overpowered the drone carriers are, and the tanks. Those are primarily the things that do all the work here. This stack here only has 2 units that are even capable of really contributing anything, and like this stack here, these guys, they're kind of okay, but they're not anything that's going to get us through this fight here. It really is up to the drone carrier and the tanks to get that sort of fight done. Over here, we've got access to our mediocre and the initiate, as well as a couple of heavily upgraded troopers, a hero, and then we also picked up a plague lord. Now, the plague lord is also something that's kind of similar to the what the hell are these even called? I can never remember. The Herald of Oblivion, and that's a big, stompy, terrifying monster. I upgrade him the same way I would upgrade the Herald of Oblivion to a certain extent there. We've got access to the sequential kill system, we got the pain mirror, and we got nanite injectors, just making it so that this guy's capable of stomping into the enemy army and really sort of tanking it out there, causing some problems while they're mixed in there. Same thing for this Phoenix Walker that I picked up there. It's got access to the pain mirror. In this case, we're also able to add reactive armor plating and the sequential kill system. These top tier units tend to have abilities that have a single action. So we're capable, for example, of walking in using a bunch of plasma cutter and then using firestorm. Similar sort of thing with the Herald of Oblivion there. If we got one of these guys, we'd be able to use ethereal claws if we wanted to kill something, and then we could sort of jump over and use abyssal reverberation, assuming we haven't already used it there. Unfortunately, Glimpse of the Abyss and Oblivion Refrain both already take full actions there. But this does have a fairly low cooldown, so we can expect it to come back up over the course of the fight there, so we can use that to kill someone and then use another leap pretty much right after that in a couple situations there. We can also make more consistent use of our sequential kill system by running straight at the enemy there. The next turn we use ethereal claws to slash someone to pieces, and then use abyssal reverberation rather than using this to get into the middle of combat, because you can just rely on the fact that you will have the enemy in melee overwatch if you just run at them, which is a pretty powerful effect there. So anyhow, that is my look at Psynumber Vanguard. Do I think that this is the best combination? I do not. I think that there are other stronger combinations out there, but this one has got some things that it can do that are effective. I think that one of the problems is that like Vanguard's late game stuff is really, really powerful and really durable and really capable, as well as the Psynumber late game stuff there. I don't think that their early game stuff is really necessarily amazing. The Trooper's pretty good there. The Engineer can work quite well, although the Engineer requires support from other things, and the Trooper requires really expensive upgrades to be super effective. And even then they'll be quite fragile, so they need something that's capable of protecting them. That's not really what Psynumbra offers. I think that Psynumbra is more of a late game sort of mobile offense-based sort of system. But even then, it's kind of tricky to nail down exactly what they're supposed to be good at when you're looking at the Vanguard Psynumber combination there. I think that there's just a lot of things that do the same that they're doing, but a little bit better. The one thing that I will say that is uniquely good about this is, in fact, this tank build here of reactive armor plating as well as Pain Mirror, as well as the fact that Vanguard is capable of using the abilities of these guys better than pretty much any other faction, thanks both to their ability to flip units around using their call-ins, as well as using the jetpacks. That sort of combination of things makes them substantially better at using these types of units than other factions there. So anyway, hope you found this episode enjoyable, and of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.